And what I love about this subject and what I love about it specifically for this show is that we're always talking about confronting the realities of the business of healthcare. And that's why I said at the beginning, like, it sounds great. And it sounds, we're going to have price transparency. We're going to have patient engagement. We're going to do all of these things to make it a better experience. And we have to do those things, but you can't just say you're going to do them and slap them out there. The reason the healthcare industry is the way that it is today because of a zillion conflators that will make it really difficult for you to figure out how to make this stuff work. And that's what we're always digging into. It's like, what are all of those issues? What are those competing priorities? What are the counterintuitive reimbursement models that are making organizations do the things that they do or not do the things that they do? And as we get into this stuff with price transparency and costs of care and, and the real patient engagement and patient experience, we need to understand, as innovators, we need to understand and be able to work around, through, alongside of, with those issues. We can't ignore them away, or you're just going to be, another kind of also ran, your innovation never got off the ground, and you're just left frustrating thinking nobody in healthcare actually cares. And that's just not true, Steve, right? And that, like, right. You have the medical background, you know firsthand what it means to go and, get into this world to care for people, but you also know firsthand what some of those restrictions are and some of those pressures that you face as a provider are that prevent you from doing some of this stuff. So that's long-winded, but that's what I love about this topic, because it is absolutely something we have to do, but it is not a slam dunk. There is a lot of work to be done and a lot of difficult issues to be tackled. What would you say to that from your perspective with that hands-on experience?
With healthcare today, we have just amazing care, amazing people, amazing innovation wrapped up in a sea of dysfunction. And I think that describes it pretty darn well right now with what's happening. I mean, there's lots of great gems coming out on the technology side. There's lots of money flowing into healthcare. There's improvements being made, certainly, in care experience and care quality. I know there's a lot of emphasis now with health systems and hospitals around that. But the real elephant in the room here is price. And it's very interesting that pricing in healthcare is really a taboo topic. I've had this discussion with so many leaders, Don, down at HIMSS, on my show, and I'm going to tell you, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it because that really is, to me, the linchpin that holds all this together. Today, you talk to anybody about healthcare prices, Don, and almost always there will be a flipping that occurs. You see it in the media, you see it with healthcare leaders, you see it with PR people. They flip the term healthcare pricing, which is a consumer-centered term, to healthcare costs, which is really a business term. So watch that magic happen, because they don't want to talk about price. And that is a major linchpin. And as we're going to get into today, when we talk about consumerism, that is exactly where retail health and non-healthcare consumer companies are tapping into. So they're tapping into a sweet spot that healthcare simply wants to avoid and sweep under the rug. They always have, and people are drifting to it.
Yeah, right on. And the reason they don't want to talk about it is because there are no good answers. And the answers that would have to be given to the questions of why does this thing cost this much? Why does this MRI cost $2,800? The answer to that question is not good. And putting it on the cover of a newspaper would not be good for the healthcare business. And they don't want to answer those questions. And now, to your point though, and the quote you gave is perfect, because in no way am I suggesting that there are people out there on purpose who are leading healthcare organizations and leading hospitals that are just trying to screw us because they can. Right. This system and the incentives, this is where you always hear the term perverse incentives. Like, there are some real perverse incentives that make it almost impossible for anybody to do it differently, or at least, I shouldn't say almost impossible, but they make it very difficult because it is usually a bad business move to do the right thing. That's one of the things we say all this time on the show is like, there's no business case in healthcare for doing the right thing. And that's what makes this shift so dramatically difficult. While it sounds great that this stuff's going to be published and there's all kinds of hoopla around that, it's really just like maybe a step in the right direction. It's one tiny component to what really needs to happen here to have any actual impact on these sky high prices that you're talking about. Would you agree with that assessment?
Couple things. First of all, let's realize that at least with the American Hospital Association, they really don't want price transparency. Again, to the point we made before, they don't want any light shined on pricing or any focus on pricing. Price transparency does that. And so what winds up happening here is they fought this, Don, as you know, tooth and nail. Not only American Hospital Association, but many healthcare provider groups fought this tooth and nail going through the courts. And it had to be appealed, it had to be reappealed, and they finally lost. Now that it's in place, what we don't have are a number of things. We don't have real teeth in the penalties. First of all, it's $300 a day if you don't comply. Candidly, that's a joke. You should make it $30,000 a day, because $100,000 a year to a hospital, and certainly a health system, is nothing. It's nothing to them. And at the end of the day, it's not enough to be a deterrent. What we're not seeing is hospitals largely putting this into consumer speak. The other thing that's not happening too with this, and I think it's very important, a good friend of mine, Jordan Johnson, who runs a company called OncoSpark, which I would strongly recommend people go to, and we'll talk on that in just a sec. There's no connected pieces of care. Like if you go in and you have a sprained ankle, right, and you're a consumer, what are you going to look up? Are you going to look up, sprained ankle and here's your cost? No, it's not all rolled into an experience, right, Don? It's right. You got to look up what's the E&M code, what's the X-ray code, what sort of in-hospital medication are you getting? What about the wound dressing? What about the facility fee? And of course, it's not all bundled together. So it's not really transparent pricing. It's just enough to barely get the ball started. Candidly, it falls far short and is almost meaningless for the average consumer. Most people really have no idea how prices are even set. They really don't. And if you look at almost 66% of the money that goes into healthcare every year, if we just look at provider services, if we look at charge masters that are hospital services and all the things that go along with that, right? The products, the supplies, the drugs in-house, the equipment, the facility fees. And then if you look at drugs and the list pricing, all three of those that make up nearly 2/3 of money spent in healthcare for pricing, all of those are privately set. There are very little, if any, controls on any of them. And I think, even though I'm not a big fan of government, I may be more libertarian in my thinking, I do think that the government, if there's going to be any real change that the government can do that the individual can't, I think it needs to be in these processes of how prices actually are set from the beginning peg on those three areas. That needs to change, and change drastically if we're ever to have prices come down to reasonable levels.